Plague Knight, the Knight of Plagues. A prominent villain in the game Shovel Knight and one of the titular character's more interesting adversaries, Plague Knight is no joke. Plague Knight just recently got his own story in the form of the Plague of Shadows DLC for the aforementioned game Shovel Knight. This DLC served to really flesh out his character, much beyond what he was in the initial game. Being one of the 3 boss knights from the game to be planned for DLC, he's recently been thrust into the limelight following the release of his own DLC pack. It might seem strange at first to play as one of the more minor bosses from the game, but it really works well as it turns out that Plague Knight has a really interesting story that never really came across in the main game. Anyway, to get to the main point of this video, Plague Knight is one of the more interesting characters in Shovel Knight, and also just so happens to be kind of dark, both in design and storytelling. So in the spirit of the spooky season, and also because I really didn't have anything else to do for a Halloween special, I figured it would be interesting to take a look at Plague Knight's story, and find out just what makes him tick. So without further ado, let's delve into Plague Knight's tale from the Plague of Shadows DLC for Shovel Knight. Okay, so obviously Shovel Knight doesn't have much in the way of obvious story elements, being that it was made in the same vein as many classic 8-bit games, which were pretty light on the storytelling to say the least. But for what it does show us, we can get a pretty good idea of Plague Knight's goals in life. During the intro to the game, which consists of a simple picture book-like slideshow accompanied by some descriptive text, Plague Knight's story is set up. It begins by recalling the events of the Enchantress's rise to power as the main villain of the game, as well as the creation of the Order of No Quarter, her own villainous group of 8 knights who Plague Knight also happens to be a part of. It's stated though that he has his own plans far beyond the wishes of the Enchantress, and is alluded to that he might just be using the group to further his own goals. Keeping in theme with his portrayal as a skilled alchemist in the main game, Plague Knight's plans revolve mostly around his dream to create the ultimate potion. This potion is said to be so potent that nothing the user desired would be out of their reach. So with Plague Knight's not so heroic background, it's safe to assume that he probably doesn't want it for any noble reasons. Also alluded to through the pictures during the intro sequence is the fact that he has his own secret organization that works under him, including a certain standout female member who we later find out is his love interest and partner in crime, Mona. Though we also later find out that he hasn't really made his feelings towards her known. But that's essentially where the intro bit ends. It's okay though, because it's really given us all we need as players to know where Plague Knight's loyalties lie. But the one thing it doesn't tell us is where he's coming from and what he hopes to get out of his plans. Luckily though, throughout the rest of the game, his true nature is kinda revealed, and we can ultimately get a pretty good idea of his actual motivations. Plague Knight, as is shown through many of his conversations with different characters throughout the game, is quite brash to say the least. He treats most people with disrespect and is able to act quite bold when confronted. The thing is, he isn't exactly how he seems. He may talk big, but it's shown through the story that it really is only that. Talk. I mean, he can use his potions and other skills quite effectively in a fight, but beyond that, he's actually quite weak and cowardly. Some people such as Spectre Knight and Polar Knight are able to see through his bold persona to his true snake-like self, with the latter calling Plague Knight's fighting tactics cheap tricks, and the former remarking that Plague Knight is a hollow and blustering fool, as well as stating that he's only hiding from himself under his mask. So as you may imagine, his self-esteem isn't exactly King Knight levels, and this likely fuels his actions even more so. He's even shown to be so lacking in confidence that he won't even tell Mona how he feels about her, instead thinking that creating the ultimate potion will give him the power he needs to make his feelings clear. He also opts to hide behind a mask and not show his true face to her, which only speaks more to his cowardice given that she's his partner and the one he has feelings for. Oh, and speaking of the mask, his entire design as a character actually kinda lends itself well to the whole idea of cowardice. I mean, it's inspired by people who literally covered themselves for a living, and they too were also pretty cowardly, so it makes a lot of sense. Let's travel a few centuries back in time and I'll show you what I mean. Around the time period of the 1300s to the 1700s, there were many people who treated epidemics such as the Black Death or the bubonic plague, known as plague doctors. These people took it upon themselves to treat patients who had contracted the disease. Only problem is they didn't necessarily have all the credentials to be treating the plague, let alone any medical ailment to begin with. Hell, many of them were just con men trying to make a quick buck off the poor and desperate. Anyway, they would often show up to afflicted towns, garbed in a thick cloak-like cloth, as well as a mask with a long beak. With the cloak being thick and waxed over and the mask being filled with incense and other scented materials, they believed they would be protected from being infected by any bad air, thought at the time to be a primary factor in the spread of diseases. But back to the point of this video, does any of this sound a little familiar? The mask, the cloak, and the snaky con man attitude? It's literally Plague Knight to a T. Even the cane he's sometimes depicted using has its roots back with the Plague Doctors, as they would use a long cane to treat patients in order to avoid any contact. But, you get the point. We could go on all day drawing historical comparisons, but I think enough has been said that we can probably see just what the creators of Shovel Knight, Yacht Club Games, had in their mind when they were creating the character. It really is interesting, though, just to see how influenced by both the demeanor and tactics, as well as the actual depictions of some people from history a single character can be, yet still being really unique and fleshed out in their own right. And that's coming from a game in which one of the main selling points was its simplicity. If you'd like to know his full story, though, I really do suggest you go play Shovel Knight. It's really fun and challenging, and as we've seen from this video, surprisingly in-depth when it comes to the story. Anyway, that's about it for this time, so if you enjoyed what you saw, please give it a like, and if you have any suggestions for future videos, or even future characters to cover, please leave a comment telling me so down below. Also, if you just so happen to be someone who likes getting notifications in your subscriptions box, go ahead and hit that little old subscribe button. It'll make your dreams come true. Also, as a little bonus, I've linked a video by Gaijin Goomba from The Game Theorist in the description. It's a video explaining Plague Knight's historical origins a little bit more in depth. I think he does a pretty good job of explaining everything, and does it in a much more eloquent way than I could probably ever do. So go check that out if you get a chance. Anyway, that's about all I have to say, so thanks for watching and happy spooky day! Except that this video is like 5 days late or something, and it's not Halloween anymore, but just don't pay attention to that part.